Welcome. My name is Jim,
And I am Garrett.
and this is Jim and Garrett at the movie.
Movies.
You were a little bit longer on your. We got to work on that.
A little more flourish on my end, yeah.
We are separated by 2,000 miles to our new listeners. Well, of course, to our new listeners, because this is the first episode of Jim and Garrett at the Movies. This is a new podcast where we're talking about current film. We'll be talking about one news item, and we will invite you, the listeners, to join in our movie club. Every week, we will select a film that is similar to the main review topic that we're talking about, and we will discuss that film as well. Now, all of our reviews will be non-spoilery, but the movie club will be full spoiler discussion. And basically, the genesis of this podcast, the reason that I thought we should start is my best friend Garrett living 2,000 miles away in Sacramento, and me living in Indiana. We have really interesting discussions about movies, and we like to share our love of movies. We like to share our conversations about movies, and so podcast was a great way to do that. So, do you want to add anything to that, Garrett, or?
Yeah, just to go just a tiny bit deeper, for so many years now, we've had so many great conversations, oftentimes stretching hours late into the night about movies and differences of opinions and perspectives and so forth. It's just been a really great time. And so it made sense to try to sort of condense that, put that open on the format, and hope that at least there's a few people out there who might appreciate hearing our thoughts too.
Absolutely. So with no further ado, we'll get in straight to our movie review segment. This is the first film that we are reviewing, and it is a really interesting film. It's called Sorry to Bother You. Written, directed by Boots Riley, and starring Lakeith Stanfield, Tessa Thompson, Armie Hammer, Terry Crews. This tells the story of a telemarketer, an African-American telemarketer, who achieves success in a telemarketing firm by perfecting his quote-unquote white voice. Now, it's in extraordinarily inventive film. It's interesting. There are a lot of ideas that we can dig into this. So let's just start with some general impressions. I like this film. I like this film a lot. I think that there's so many really interesting ideas. I don't think the film's perfect. I think there are some issues with some of the character relationships, but by and large, I'm in love with the ideas of this film so much that I think it's worth everybody taking a look at. It's one of the indie darlings of the year. It's getting great reviews from critics, 94% on Rotten Tomatoes. The audience score is a little bit low, 63% like it, and they give it a 3.4 out of 5 rating. So it's not connecting as much with audiences than it is with critics. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that, and once again, I'm not going into spoilers, but I think people who haven't seen this film should be warned. This film goes full absurdist in the second act. So if you're not comfortable with absurdist material in films, then this one might catch you a little bit off guard. But at this point, what do you think, Garrett? What did you like? What did you dislike? What are your general thoughts about the film first?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thought, of course, is that two white men talking about what's clearly a predominantly African-American film is something that needs to have sort of a lantern hung on it. Obviously, I'm coming at it from a particular perspective, which I may not have been the intended audience necessarily, but I came into this film completely cold. I knew absolutely nothing about it at all. I had no warning, no preparation for it. I knew it was supposed to be a comedy. I think that was about it. And I had some deeply mixed feelings about it, to be honest. I mean, there were some things, I mean, it is definitely its own creature. It's not copying anyone else's style or any other sort of genre of film. The closest thing I could think to compare it to might be something like a David Lynch film, but even that's not really fair because it's much more comedic and much more sort of more social commentary than David Lynch, but it has some of that, that absurdist weirdness where the narrative and the thread sort of gets lost just for some sort of postmodern weird for the sake of being weird stuff. So yeah, it's hard for me to really sort of give a all things considered evaluation, because it's creative, it's inventive, it's commenting on some really important topics, and it's doing so in an interesting way. At the same time, I felt that especially during the second act, the comedy took a real back seat to sort of the absurdism, and I felt sort of it lost what I really liked about the first part of the film. And ultimately, I felt that while it was definitely bringing up some important social topics, I don't know that it necessarily delivered a clear statement about what to do about these topics or how we ought to react to them. It's sort of just saying, hey, this is a problem. Doesn't that suck? Well, yeah, it does, but where do we go from there? I mean, it's not necessarily the film's job to solve that problem, but at the same time, it sort of felt like I walked out of the film not having anything more like a deeper appreciation for the kinds of social problems that it was trying to get me to think about than when I walked in.
Yeah, I think your self-response was my response, as you were saying. That the film doesn't present solutions to these problems that it brings up, and I'm like, well, my first thought was, well, I don't know if that's really the film's job, and I don't know if that's what Boots Riley is going for as he's creating this. Yeah, I sort of echo a lot of the things you say. It is a little bit tonally mixed. That worked for me because I realized that I was in for a wild ride. That as soon as the film started, we're in for an alternative. It's an alternative present, and in that sense, it's really defying any of my expectations. It's defying any of the things that I really want to bring to the film. And at that point, I just sort of surrendered and said, "Okay, I'm going on whatever journey you're going to take me," because I realized that this is. It's, if nothing else, it is definitely competently made. And one thought that occurred to me while I was listening to you talk is Chris Stuckman said in a review of a different film, Black Klansman, he said that it feels as though Spike Lee had felt like this was the last film he was going to make, so he's going to put all of his ideas now just in case he doesn't make another film. And I don't necessarily agree with that about Black Klansman. I think that is definitely true about this film. It feels like this is the last film that Boots Riley was going to make, and he's going to make sure that everything that he ever wanted to say about class and about race and about how corporatization has sort of taken over our lives. He's going to say all of that right now, just in case he doesn't have a chance to say it again. And that energy is really exciting. One of the things that's interesting about this film and the way it's being covered in some of the reviews is that I think there are a lot of people who recognize the voice behind this film, but are sort of excited to see where he goes next, excited to see what the next step is. And that's true, but I also don't want to not appreciate the piece of art that we have here. What we have here is really interesting. I think so. Let's go to some of the constituent parts of the film. For me, what motivated me most about this were the interesting ideas that it was bringing up. It was bringing up a concept of a proletariat. Like, I think this film is more about class. It's certainly about race, but I think it's more about class than it is about race. I think it's about more about how we as a society are sort of participants in our own degradation in a corporatized society. And I think that's a really interesting, that's a great idea to make a movie about. Whether this is the best telling of that story, we might disagree. I don't think it's the best telling of this story, but I think that it's a really strong telling of that story. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that your earlier point about how he's throwing everything at the wall in case he doesn't get another shot is indeed a fair one. But the problem is, while on the one sense there's kind of a heroism that's admirable about that, at the same time, the end product, I think, sort of suffers from that. I think actually some of the stuff that I did like the best were the moments that were focusing on race. Again, no spoilers, but there's a scene in which a group of white people force the main character to rap, which is just absolutely hilarious in my opinion. The worth the price of admission alone. It's wonderful.
And a little cringy too.
Oh, it's very cringy, and that's what makes it so wonderful. Is that, it's white people being oblivious, in an over the top way, and that kind of not necessarily subtle racism, but and I wouldn't call it innocuous racism either, but the racism that white people think isn't racism, right?
It's the get out racism.
Yeah, if you want to put it that way, yeah. So I like those kinds of scenes a lot. Tessa Thompson also has a really interesting scene in which she's doing a performance art piece, which is poignant and powerful. The stuff about class and about the working class in particular, I really like. I liked it in the first act. I like the setup. They have where they're sort of establishing the tone, establishing the problem, and then there's sort of the basic conflict between the characters because the main character sort of starts to succeed, and it's hard to know how he relates to his old friends who are in the trenches, who are trying to unionize and stuff like that. I liked that aspect of it, but I sort of felt that that kind of then took a backseat in the latter half of the second and then the third act to. This sort of criticism, not necessarily of sort of working class proletariat versus the bourgeoisie, but rather a sort of the tech bro Armie Hammer's character, who starts to sort of trying to sort of monetize and becomes the late villain at the end of the piece, and that just sort of really felt unbalanced and unwieldy, like they were changing gears, not completely, but enough. And there's this absurdist tone with where this sort of sci-fi element comes in at the end, which it was not only kind of disgusting. I mean, it was supposed to be disgusting, but it was just fucking weird. I mean, like, it again, not that absurdist is a bad thing, but it went in a direction that was completely out of left field for me, and it felt like they just sort of dropped some of the interesting stuff that they were building on earlier on, and shifted gears to say, oh, another thing. Right. And that kind of felt unfocused, and for me, hurt the film.
I think the transitions from the second to third act are where this film is most difficult and probably the weakest. I think you're nailing the problems that I had with the latter part of the film. I think in addition, there's a central relationship between two characters. I don't want to go too specific into this because it's spoilers, but that there's a transition between their relationship that I don't think was fully explored the way it could have been. So, I mean, are we saying that this is like a really interesting 2 acts of a film, or are we saying that this is that the film just lacks a real cohesion to put it into a 5-star category for us?
I mean, for me, what I'd say is I think there's a lot of really good ideas. There's a lot of daring decisions that are being made. And there's definitely an original and powerful voice behind the camera. And he's definitely pioneering stuff, which I think other people are going to try to follow in the future, and that will be interesting too. But judging the film as a complete unity, it didn't work for me. There was too many parts where it fell down, too many parts where I felt like it lost its focus, lost the thread, and that it was more interested in bringing up conversation pieces than actually saying anything particularly insightful about them.
Interesting. Okay. I like this film a little bit more perhaps, but I think I certainly see some of your points. I mean, the idea that it lacks cohesion is a thing. So overall, would you recommend it out of 5 stars? What would you give it?
It's really hard to say. I mean, I would recommend it to some people, but not to others. I think to the typical mainstream audience, if I didn't know anything about your movie tastes, I probably would say I can't recommend it. It would only be if I knew you were a fan of a particular kind of film or had a particular sort of aesthetic or particular philosophy that you might be interested in it. But I don't think that's one that's for mainstream audiences. It doesn't surprise me that the audiences on Rotten Tomatoes aren't resonating as much with this as the critics are, because it's the kind of film I think critics would really like because it's unorthodox. Sure. And when you see movies for a living, you get so bored with typical filmmaking. Something fresh and novel is really going to make you perk up. But if you're looking for just sort of escapism, if you're looking for entertainment, if you're just looking for a good time, I think for most people, sorry to bother you, wouldn't be it. So on a 5-star scale, I think I'd have to give it 2.5.
Okay. I'm at 4. I recommend it. I recommend it for I sort of give caution to mainstream audiences. This is not the Meg. This is not this is not an Avengers film. This is not this is not one of the films that you can predict from frame one what's going to happen at the end. But I think in our film culture right now, a lot of things that I'm hearing are lamenting lack of original work. And so when we lament a lack of original work, and then we don't go to support something like Sorry to Bother You, it's one of those things where I think there's a bit of a contradiction. I'll have to disagree. I think this film is incredibly entertaining, even on a surface level. If you're not seeing some of the underlying themes of this film, I think you'll nonetheless enjoy the hell out of some of the if nothing else, David Cross doing the white voice, I think, is perfect.
Right. And that's a real comic highlight, I felt. And then the shift away from that sort of comedic punchline again felt jarring to me. So it definitely points for creativity and originality. All the way there, and there's definite moments which are hilarious that I think that anyone would laugh at and mainstream audiences would get to. But there's a lot of connective tissue in there that's just weird shit.
Yeah, I like weird shit, and if you like weird shit too, then this might be the film for you. So let's transition now to our news item. This came out, about 12 days ago, August 8th. The Academy, I'm reading from the Academy Awards Twitter account, changes coming to the #Oscars. Here's what you need to know. A new category is being designed around achievement in popular film. They've set an earlier air date for 2020. That doesn't affect the 2019 broadcast. And we are planning a more globally accessible 3-hour telecast. From The Hollywood Reporter, president of the Academy, John Bailey, and CEO of the Academy, Dawn Hudson, say the board is committed to producing an entertaining show in 3 hours. They explain this will be achieved partly by presenting select categories live in the Dolby Theater during commercial breaks, categories to be determined. These categories will not be removed from the telecast. Instead, the winning moments will be edited and aired later in the broadcast. What is more, about the popular film category, they add that eligibility requirements and other key details will be forthcoming, but there are people who are already calling this both the Popcorn Oscar and the Black Panther Oscar. I'm actually an Academy Awards. I love the Academy Awards. It's one of my highlights of the movie year. Garrett, you have a completely different perspective on the Academy Awards. What's your reaction to this news and to the Academy Awards as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what to think about it yet. Basically, all my movie buff friends have been calling this a terrible idea. And I see their points, and I imagine you're going to elaborate on those later. But for me, it's possible that this thing actually might mitigate some of the problems I have with the Academy Awards. And one of the problems I have is that it seems that frequently there is a huge push within the Academy to reward sort of the commercial tent poles, not necessarily the greatest artistic achievement in Oscars. And the reason why is because, the way the Academy works is it's all politicized behind the scenes, and, big rich distributors and movie companies will push to try to have the movies that they want to make a lot of money, get a lot of attention and recognition, and win a lot of awards. And so they push the ones they think which of them have the most commercial viability, as opposed to the ones which necessarily are the greatest artistic achievements. So possibly, cross fingers, hope that this division might sort of allow to take some of that pressure off, and the best picture can go to the film which genuinely is the best picture, and the movie studios will sort of be able to get their cash cows out on this separate popular film thing. That's sort of the optimistic take that I have. I have no idea if it's actually going to play out like that. Maybe that's naive of me. Again, I obviously have no idea about what the details are going to be, but that's kind of what I would hope, if for no other reason than it might mitigate that one of many problems that I have with the Oscars, and maybe we can talk about some of those other ones in a bit. But for now, why don't I hand it back to you, and you tell me what your overall thoughts are and react to mine.
Sure. So I think that my first thought about this was it came from something Dan Murrell tweeted, and there were a couple other Dan Murrell of Screen Junkies tweeted, and a fair other film buffs, was what actually defines popular film. And the fact that they're saying eligibility requirements and other key details will be forthcoming, it's sort of like they took a shit in the middle of the party and then left the room. They're not really telling us what's going on, what this is happening. There are multiple problems that this is attempting to solve, and I don't understand. And so we'll get to that in a little bit. But I want to talk about this: what defines a popular film? I think this is actually one debate in which semantics actually matter. If they had changed this to, instead of best achievement in popular film, to something like most entertaining, then you're not setting aside popular film as a genre unto itself. Now, Dan Murrell brought up the point about Blade Runner 2049. It was clearly intended by the studio to be a popular film. What they ended up in the can with is a 3-hour meditation on humanity, and so it became a more artistic film in the actual production of it than it was in its intention. So does that mean that because they intended, based upon budget and marketing and blah blah blah, to make this a popular film, is it suddenly an artistic film that goes in the Best Picture category now that we see what's in the can? I think that's the contradiction that Murrell is drawing us to, and I think it's a fair one. What is more, ever since Star Wars The Last Jedi, which is just by mentioning that, I think we've doubled our dislikes on this video, because that is such a polarizing film. Part of what the conversation around that film brought to the fore is a division between audiences and critics. That critics like a certain type of film, audiences like another type of film, and if the Academy Award is going to put in this best achievement in popular film, it's only exacerbating that division. A division that I think is it's corrosive to our film conversation. It's corrosive to our entertainment culture. I don't like the fact that we have this division between critics and audiences. I wish that, because critics are fans too, critics are audiences too, and this idea that that never the twain shall meet, and then the Academy Awards institutionalizing and exacerbating that, I think, is a dangerous thing.
Well, we don't know for sure yet that that's actually what they're doing. I mean, again, that might be what they're doing, but that details forthcoming is a very important qualification.
Sure.
I mean, I'm not saying that we shouldn't speculate, because obviously, that's part of what they're inviting us to do. But at the same time, I don't think we should come to any hard and fast conclusions until we know exactly what it is that they're thinking. Maybe it'll be as bad, maybe it'll be worse, maybe it won't be as bad once that comes out. But to that, I mean, to one of the points you said there, I think it makes sense to divide critics and audiences, because it's not that never the twain shall meet. Obviously, someone like Steven Spielberg can manage to make incredibly popular films, which also have considerable artistic merit at the same time. So it's not that those two worlds are completely non-overlapping, but like I mentioned earlier, if critics are people who watch films all the time, they do it oftentimes for a living, if not just for a heightened hobby. And when you do that, when you consume that much media, when you do it critically, you're going to come to the next film with a very different set of expectations and lenses over your eyes than if you're a person who just wants a little bit of escapism or something like that. So I think there is a real and demographically traceable difference between those two audiences, which is why things like Rotten Tomatoes have the 2 scores rather than just 1.
Yeah. But the problem is studios in the entertainment business are leveraging that. I remember this is sort of a sidebar, but the marketing around the John Travolta Gotti film included trust audiences, not some troll behind a keyboard. So yeah, Leonard Maltin's a fucking troll behind a keyboard. That that's mean-spirited and it's cynical, and to add to that in any way makes me ugh. Makes me ugh. That's your pull quote. Yeah, I think that if we had had a film that's most entertaining, that a Best Picture award winner, if people genuinely thought that The Shape of Water was both the best picture and the most entertaining picture of last year, if we had that category, I think I would have a few less reservations about this. But separating this between picture and best popular, like making popular film a genre unto itself, I think is a difficult thing. Aaron Dicer tweeted out something that I just want to read real quick, and it's a great tweet. He said, these are 5 film categories that should exist before best popular film. Best casting, I don't know about that. Best stunt work, definitely. Best digital performance for voice actors and mocap. Best overall performance, gender neutral. I disagree with that one. And best original film, not based upon any other source material. I actually think best original film is a fantastic category to add. I think those are interesting things that should be those should be considered before separating popular film into its own genre.
We already have best original screenplay, and that would sort of be keeping with that same tradition, I think. So that makes a certain degree of sense to me. Mm-hmm. But at this, I mean, again, if I'm thinking back to last year, and a film like Call Me by Your Name, yes. It was obvious that was not going to win Best Picture, not because it wasn't the most artistic picture, it wasn't a good film, but simply because it did not have the kind of corporate backing that would be necessary to run a campaign that would get it to win. Now, again, I was a fan of Shape of Water. I thought it was a great film, but if that category existed separately, then maybe the studios would have put their chips behind Shape of Water for best popular film or most entertaining film or whatever it ends up being called, and then something like Call Me by Your Name might have stood a better chance of winning. Now, again, I'm not necessarily saying that's the way it should have gone, or it's a grave injustice that Call Me by Your Name didn't win or anything like that. But something like that, I think, would help me overcome some of my concerns about how the Oscars were being run.
Well, I think you're drawing me to another point in sort of a response to your early criticisms about the Oscars, is that the Oscars exists, in my mind, to draw attention to the films that didn't get the huge marketing push. I don't think I would have seen Call Me by Your Name unless it was nominated for an Academy Award. And the fact that the Academy Award highlighted me to that film, I think is thank you, Academy Awards. The other film that I think should have been nominated but wasn't, it was only nominated for Best Supporting Actor, and that's The Florida Project, a profoundly interesting film that I probably wouldn't have seen if not for the Academy Awards. This is the service that the Academy provides, is drawing my attention to films that I otherwise would not have seen.
Yeah, and I think that's just, I think it's naive, frankly. I don't think that's maybe that's what they ought to exist for. Maybe that's what they originally came into existence for. But now that's not what it is. And it hasn't been that in some time. Now it is very much a sort of corporate political push to try to get, industry cash cows to make more money for the projects that they think they can squeeze more blood out of. And there isn't anything inherently wrong with that, but I don't think it should be confused with actually trying to recognize artistic achievement.
Well, if that were the case, then the Disney remake of Beauty and the Beast would have won Best Picture last year. And, that was certainly one of the top 10 box office grosses. It has Disney behind it. So I agree that there's definitely some campaigning, especially in the LA area. There are Oscar campaigns, and it almost is, instead of Best Picture, Best Oscar campaign. I get that. And the Shakespeare in Love win over Saving Private Ryan, I know you like Shakespeare in Love quite a bit, but the Shakespeare in Love win over Saving Private Ryan, I think, is indicative of a good Oscar campaign. Harvey Weinstein, in addition to all of the terrible things that he was a fantastic Oscar campaigner, and he certainly got behind Shakespeare in Love, and that's part of the reason for that win. It was because it had such a great campaign. I get that, but if what you were saying was totally true, then we would have had a Beauty and the Beast Best Picture nominee, and I'm so happy we didn't, because that movie sucks.
In fairness, Shape of Water kind of is Beauty and the Beast, really. I mean, I think actually Guillermo del Toro described it as Beauty and the Beast, where the Beast doesn't have to transform at the end, which I actually think is a lovely idea. And I think the film was lovely and fantastic and wonderful. But yeah, it's obviously there is competing ideas going on there. I think Disney recognized that Beauty and the Beast was not going to get anything more perhaps than some technical awards. They were not going to be able to sell it as a best picture kind of story. Ditto for Avengers and other movies like that. But the thing is that they don't need to do it for Beauty and the Beast or the Avengers. Those movies are making tons of money on their own. So they're not going to put Oscar weight behind films like that to get more cash out of them, because they've already squeezed all the blood they can. It's the sort of the second tier hits and sometimes the third tier hits that they think that they can get more money out of, that they end up throwing the weight behind. But I mean, again, I haven't prepared a list, but I could go through a list of films of in the last decade that have been at least nominated for Oscar, which I would put on par with Beauty and the Beast in terms of the overall artistic achievement.
The Beauty and the Beast remake?
Yeah, well, I mean, first I didn't see the Beauty and the Beast remake, so maybe I shouldn't comment on that. But I saw the original Beauty and the Beast, and I saw enough and read enough about the remake that I'm pretty sure I can glean what was going on. But yeah, no, I think there's a lot of bad movies that get nominated for at least not necessarily Best Picture, but something in those high tier ones: Best Actor, Best Director, etc., and so forth.
Sure. I mean, I'll just read the Oscar nominees from last year for Best Picture: Call Me by Your Name, Darkest Hour, Dunkirk, Get Out, Lady Bird, Three Billboards, Shape of Water, The Post, Phantom Thread. I don't know if many of those sort of fit that thesis, though.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't call any of those bad movies, but several of them I think were way off of Oscar worthy. Okay. I mean. Yeah, I don't want to go into the specifics, because we could end up getting into the weeds on that. But
yeah, we'll start talking about how much we didn't like Darkest Hour.
Right. So yeah, I mean, yeah. So none of those are as bad as I imagined the Beauty and the Beast remake was. But again, it wouldn't be that hard, I think, to find some more examples again if you go back a decade or so.
Sure.
So one last bit, I think we should want to start wrapping this up, but I do want to say something at least about the broadcast changes that they're talking about.
Yes.
Trying to put on a tighter 3-hour show. And again, this speaks to another concern that I have about the Oscars, is that, again, if it were, as it were, artistically pure, I recognize we live in a capitalistic society. That's maybe too much to ask, but it would be sort of a straightforward, hey, here are people who do really good work and they deserve your attention and your recognition. And fuck you if you're going to tune out for these smaller Oscars, because those people totally deserve the recognition that they get. And now they're trying to sort of, shuffle them to the side a little bit. Again, I sort of naively hope that they figure out a way to balance all that out and get recognition where it's due, and not just make it about the high end ones. But at the same time, I rarely actually watch the Oscars, in no small part because I don't like the way it's executed as a presentation. And again, it markets itself as a celebration of film. But I think oftentimes what it ends up being more is a matter of sort of horse race, and this attempted manufacture at excitement and drama. And, these little inner sliced pieces that they have to try to sort of highlight and promote the race for Best Picture. Again, it's obviously a difficult job. And I don't envy the person who's going to have to edit those bits on the live broadcast to reinsert it later. That's going to be an incredibly challenging job. Maybe give that person an Oscar for editing in and of themselves, or an Emmy, perhaps. I guess that would be more appropriate, right? So, mixing up the format again. At the very least, it gives it an opportunity to possibly fix some of my concerns. Again, I don't want to assume that it's going to fix it. I'm not saying it's necessarily a good thing. In fact, it's probably not going to be a good thing. But at least there's some hope that the end result actually will be closer to what I would want to see out of an Oscars show.
The problem that this is trying to solve is, so the film, the Oscar broadcast had historically low ratings this last year. It was almost Let me look at the figures in the Hollywood Reporter. 26.5 million viewers. That was historically low. The problem, and Jimmy Kimmel, the host of the Oscars, pointed this out when he was responding to Trump's tweets about the Oscars. Said, "Well, television ratings have been declining ever since Netflix." And I think the way many people watch the Oscars in the era of YouTube is they wait till the next morning and then they watch the acceptance speeches and the things that they find interesting. They sort of they turn the Oscars into an a la carte menu, and these changes to the broadcast are a problem. I get that, but I watch the Oscars for some of the speeches, and some of the most excited, happy people in the room are not Meryl Streep, who's nominated for, I think, 20 best actresses and won, I believe, 3 or 4. She's not the most excited in the room. The most excited in the room is the kid who is just out of film school, who made a short film, and that film won a film festival and then another film festival and was nominated for an Oscar, and is now like, this is the moment of that guy or gal's life. This is the moment, and I want to see that pure unbridled joy. Now maybe I'll get that in the 15-minute the edited version, but the idea that we are sort of giving these people short shrift, and these people also won, that doesn't make me happy. What could also, like, the way to solve this problem, if you want to get it under 3 hours, fine. Then there are montages, there are introductions, there are comedy bits that in some cases don't work. You can cut those. Why not cut those? Why not combine categories so you don't have to introduce multiple hosts at the same time? So have the best sound effects, sound editing, film editing, and score. Well, no. Have those 3 be one introducer, one presenter rather, and then have best screenplay, best original, best adapted screenplay, best editing. Put both of the song categories together, score and sound, or score and song. Put those categories together instead of what they're trying to do is they're trying to have as many stars as presenters as possible, because people will think people will tune in to see Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson say something for 5 minutes, rather than tuning in to see purely excited people win the Academy. This is the best moment of their life, and I would like to share that moment with them. I'd like to see that moment, because one of the things that the Oscars can do as well is they can inspire young creators. One day I'm going to be up there giving an acceptance speech, and to see someone as excited as some of these people are, that would be something I would love to see. So I gotta say that I disagree with that move by the Academy, but yeah, I'd like to hear your response, and then we'll sort of wrap this up.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not unsympathetic to that moment of pure joy that you're talking about. I've definitely seen it in some Oscars and some other award shows too, and it's a hell of a moment. But at the same time, if you don't know something about that person, if you haven't seen their film, if you don't know who they are, if you haven't read about them, something, if they're just a face in the crowd and you're seeing them light up, that gets pretty old pretty quick. You know, you see that over and over again. Stranger getting excited and winning awards. Stranger getting excited getting an award. It's not going to mean much to you after very long. You know, you see Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, you know, that's someone that you have an association with, you know, hopefully positive. So I understand, again, from point of view of a broadcast that's trying to reach millions of people, it makes sense to me why you would do that. Again, if it were not, you know, again, where it's not a capitalist society, were it possible to be beholden to art for the sake of art and recognizing art for the sake of artistic achievement, you could do a 4-hour broadcast that pays all that recognition, and you don't have to worry about whether or not people are tuning in. But if you put me in charge of the Oscars, which for God's sake you shouldn't fucking do, but if you were to for some strange reason, I would understand why they would want to make these moves. So it's sort of a don't hate the player, hate the game kind of response to that criticism. And then, as far as the inspiration is concerned, I don't know. I mean, again, I realize this sounds like pretentious sort of young artist type shit, but I don't know that people should be inspired to make art because they see people winning awards. You should be inspired to make art because you want to make art, because you want to contribute something. You got a story to tell or a song to sing, or there's just something inside you that has to get out. If you're doing it even peripherally are the hopes of getting recognition or praise, then I got to kind of say that maybe you're doing it for the wrong reasons. You're doing it for not necessarily, for fame or recognition or money. And that's, I mean, again, those aren't inherently evil things, I don't think. But I don't want that to be the thing that pushes young creators into creating, because then I suspect that that's going to poison their product somehow.
Sure. I can certainly agree with that last point. And I'm not saying that this would be the sole motivation for someone to go make art. What I'm saying is that making art is hard, and our entertainment economy doesn't make it easy for new creators. And so if seeing somebody who's tried really hard and worked really hard in the Hollywood system finally had that one moment is a thing that keeps someone going, then yeah, I certainly agree with that. I think that well, I certainly agree with your criticism that this shouldn't be the sole reason, but I think it might be a thing that just keeps someone going when it's really difficult. And so we sort of meet in the middle on that one. Sort of nuance my point of view, as you're always good at. So no further discussion about the Oscars, because the Oscars will sort of close up here. But I want to introduce our movie club segment. This is a segment that we would like you, our listeners, you, our viewers, to participate in, where we'll have a live chat going for next week's episode, and we will be discussing with full spoilers the film Who's Afraid, or Who Framed, jeez, I almost did Who's Afraid of Roger Rabbit instead of Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and Roger Rabbit mixed up there. That would be an interesting film. Yes, Who Framed Roger Rabbit. We will be reviewing the film Happytime Murders, and our movie club segment will be Who Framed Roger Rabbit. So watch it in between if you haven't already seen it, and join our discussion as we talk about Who Framed Roger Rabbit next week, in addition to Happytime Murders. So that's all for our podcast. I am Jim Hunter. I'm at Twitter at JTHunter13. Garrett?
I'm Garret Merriam. I'm on Twitter at Sisyphus Redeemed. That's with REDEMED. We'll put both links to our Twitter accounts in the doobly-doo. And
this has been Jim and Garrett at the movies. And we're out.